The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Emma Williams. I'm going to be presenting today's Exago Support Lab to you all. I'm so excited to be here. I do apologize. I woke up with a bit of a frog in my throat, so we'll do our best to to keep it audible here. But just wanted to let you all know I'm a little raspy over here today. But hello and good morning. Welcome to the lab. I'm so excited to be presenting for you guys today. First and foremost, of course, can I get a yes or a Y into the questions pane? Great, loud and clear. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Great. So we actually have a bit of housekeeping to get out of the way first. I'm going to go ahead and introduce this new idea. Now, Travis McGrath, my colleague, and I have been bouncing around some ideas to give you guys more control over what the labs are on. Of course, we ask you on the registration what topics you'd like to see, but we thought maybe we'd give some more fine-grained control over exactly what you're going to be seeing via questions regarding the labs that we have possibly slated for the following month. We'll be asking these questions on the first lab of every month, and the ability to answer is going to be right on that survey following the lab. So when the lab concludes and closes up, you guys are presented with a survey that's kind of geared towards, how did we do? What could we do better for y'all? How could we help get the ideas across more clearly and concisely? Now what we've added is what topics would you like to see in the next month? So in this case, in February. We already have the second lab for January locked down. We're going to be doing stored procedures that will be presented by Nick Cortina. But for February, we have a couple of end user options. Scheduling options will walk through the scheduler, the different types of scheduled jobs you can create, how to set recurrence patterns, how to maybe archive reports or use the batch reporting functionality that we've got within Exago. So lots of good information there. The other option is going to be creating maps. Now, just to be very clear, this doesn't mean you're choosing one and the other one is just tossed out. It might be presented down the line. But we just wanted to get an idea, a feel for what you guys like and what you'd like to see more of. The technical options here are going to be an extensibility example that we've drawn up here, specifically launching custom dialogues from a report. And then the other option there is suggested security settings. So let us know on the post-lab survey what you'd like to see, and we'll take a majority in that case. Great. So let's move on to today's topic, right? That's all great. Housekeeping's out of the way, but let's get to the good stuff. Why might I be using document templates? Now, if you guys have, just to be very clear, templates are also referred to as pixel perfect forms in Exago. So if you've heard either of the terms and we're a little bit confused, you are in the right place. We are discussing both. They're the same thing in this case. But if you have highly formatted forms, maybe you downloaded them, such as a W-9 form. That'll be one that we're going to walk through today. Maybe you received them from a customer or you send them out to customers. Maybe you created them yourself. Whatever the case may be, Exago is going to allow you to merge data right from your data source onto these forms using the Exago template feature. So this form is then going to need to be set up to properly accept data from Exago, right? So we're going to walk you through the ability to merge data and how we set that up. This avoids repetitive filling in of forms such as a W-9, makes it a one-step generation of those forms. We also offer the ability to use RTF, PDF, and Excel forms here. Today I'm going to be walking through RTF and PDF forms. Now, we understand Excel is a viable platform as well. Excel is a pretty open book. All you're going to have to do there is populate the first page and use some range selections to do what you'd like on the further worksheets. So for information on using Excel, please feel free to see our documentation here. Alex, if you wouldn't mind, our document writer is on here as well, helping me out with some questions. So Alex, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link to that article in the chat for everyone, that would be awesome. Okay, great. So today we're going to take a look first at a finished product as we usually do. So we'll see what we're working towards. Excuse me. We're going to take a look at which administration settings must be set properly in order to either use templates internally and set them up yourself or allow your users to access this functionality as well. Then, as I said, we're going to walk through the creation of PDF forms outside of Exago as well as RTF, how to upload each into Exago and subsequently merge that data. We're also going to be merging dynamic data fields as well as a single row. So a single row is going to be the easier case there. So we'll walk through the dynamic generation as well. And then, as I mentioned, tune into the next lab in 2 weeks for information regarding stored procedures. All right, so let's get started here, right? I'm going to hop to Exago. We're going to see the completed form. We'll start with the PDF form. So this is a W-9. I chose this one because it's applicable and familiar to most people. It's not industry specific. It has a few fields here that are actually dynamically generated, or rather that are merged data. So we're not going to waste too much time there filling in the form fields. I want to be mindful of all of your time, and I think showing you the process is important, but the repetition can be done offline. So as far as data-driven fields here, we're looking at employee name right along the top. We've got company name here, and then the address, right? So that first address line as well as the city-state zip line following it. We're going to have to start by placing what's called form fields onto the blank version of this document. So we're going to start the process completely outside of Exago. So the first step is to upload a blank version of this document into the document editor that we're going to be using. In this case, I'm going to be using PDF Escape. Now, Adobe Acrobat is one of the more popular editors here that you might be using to plug in those form fields, but there's lots of free options available online. So I'm illustrating one of those free options today. PDF Escape does have a version that you can pay for, and you can actually use that as a desktop application. But again, I don't mind using it in a web browser, and it is free, so I've chosen this option here. Now, again, as we go through this entire process, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. We have plenty of resources on our end here to answer those questions for you, and I'm happy to discuss any of them live on the webinar if they're applicable to the whole group. So please don't be shy, again, in that respect. Cool. So the upload process here is very simple, right? You're just going to upload a document, choose one from your file system. So I can select this one, and I've already got it uploaded here, but that process is very straightforward. Now, the first thing that I need to do is determine where I'd like to place my form fields. So I knew that I wanted one under name. I want one under business name. I also want address and city-state zip here. I'm going to select form field from my upper left menu. Little training on PDF Escape here. We're going to select type text is perfectly fine. And it's prompting me, right? Click and drag to insert a new object. So what I'm going to do is actually click and drag on my name field. I'll make it nice and big so that there's plenty of room. And it creates this little green box. So this is to give me an idea of where that form field has been placed. It's a placeholder. The thing that I might want to do here, and if I right click, I have a couple options. The one I'd like to highlight here is object properties. Naming my form fields is important because you can see that it's named Untitled 1. Once we get into Exago, we're going to be linking these fields based on their name. So it's going to be important for me to name them with something that's intuitive to my data. So I'm going to call this employee name. And I'll press OK here. Now, rather than redrawing a form field, I can just duplicate this one. It's the right size for all of these fields. So I'll go ahead and do so here. And I'm going to name these as well. So just bear with me. Okay. And then we'll give these names as well. So this is going to be company. This is, oops. It's forgiving as well. This one's going to be address. And here we'll call this, so according to my data, this is actually dictated by city, region, and postal code. So I'm going to name it more intuitively for the data that I'm going to be working with. Okay, so this is about, this is really the extent of the process within PDF Escape. Is there I'm going to pause for a minute to see if there's any questions. Are there any concerns here? Anything, any confusion? Just let us know, and I'll just pause for a moment while we're still in PDF Escape. Great question. So the question is, are the names put into the form the alias name or the column name? It actually doesn't matter. The names that I'm giving my form fields are just for me, and it'll become more clear once we get into Exago. But when I'm actually merging the data, it's going to name each form field according to the name I just typed. So making it more intuitive for myself is really all I'm accomplishing by naming them here. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual merging of the data. It's just for me. Another great question came in. Would you be able to populate the exempt checkbox? Absolutely. So I'll populate either individual or C corporation in this case, and I'll show you how we might determine one or the other. So I'm going to grab another form field. Type text is fine, and I'll create a little form field over this one and a little form field over this one. Great. And I'll name them again, right? So let's call this one individual, and we'll call the other one C Corp. Okay, great. So it looks like those are the two questions that came in. Of course, continue to ask them. Those two were very easily answered verbally, and I think applicable to everyone. So we handled those live, but if there are more questions, our people on the back end are happy to answer them for you guys. So from here, very simple steps. I'm simply going to use this button to save and download my PDF. It's going to download right to my browser here. Then all I have to do is place that document within my reports folder. Now I'm approaching this from an administrative setting, okay? So since I am an admin, I'm taking the role of an admin here. I have access to my reports folder. Now, this is a great segue into those administrative settings I mentioned. The first one that we want to flip is Show Document Template. This shows the button at all. So if this is not enabled, there is never going to be a way to get into the document template menu and use a document template. This second button is to show the upload button. So if I'm creating this, or rather, if I'm enabling this functionality for my end users to be using, I'm going to want to give them the upload button since they probably don't have access to the reports folder itself. And that way, when I do go into Exago and I'll create a new report here, I'm going to start by creating a new advanced report. I'll call this one W9 with checkboxes. I'm going to add the appropriate categories. So in this case, all we need is employees. We'll grab a couple of sorts here. So we're going to add last name and employee first name. We don't need any filters, right? We want to see data for all of our employees. Everybody pays taxes, so it's a pretty generic form here. And now I've got my report. Now, I avoided the layout tab. I prefer to do it all from right within the wizard, or rather the designer here as opposed to the wizard. So certainly personal preference. Looping back to that point about either placing the document into my reports folder or uploading it as an end user might. This is what I was discussing here. This is the template button that we enabled with that first flag in the admin console. Within here, this upload button allows me to upload any document directly from my file system. So two ways you might be using this, right? Internally versus exposing it to your end users, and these are the two ways that you would go about doing that. Okay, great. So the first thing that I need to do here is actually not link the template. I need to ensure that I have all of the appropriate data on my report. So we're going to do some cleanup here. I don't need a page header. I'm going to delete that completely. I prefer to just have one column, and in this case, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to remove these columns and just expand this one. I do want everything to pull from my details section, so I'm going to give it 6 rows. Okay. Now each of these rows is going to populate a different form field for me. So all I need to do is put the data into each of these rows that each form field is expecting. Now, the first thing, and what we can do actually to make this a little bit easier on ourselves, is go back and forth if necessary and say, okay, well, what data was I looking for? We wanted name, we wanted business name. Let's start with those two. First one is going to be employee name. Now, employee name, I would prefer to have last and first names. Since this is a tax form, it's probably not a good idea to just put your last name on it or your employee's last name. So we'll hop into the formula editor. I'm going to, and for anyone who hasn't been on any of the labs since we updated to 17.2, our formula editor has a bit more advanced functionality at this point. I can begin typing, maybe I want last name, and it's going to autofill for me. It's going to predict what I might want to say based on, or what I might want to be using based on what I've typed. This will work for fields, as you can see here, as well as functions. Gonna do some simple concatenation here. This is fairly straightforward formula building, right? We're just concatenating two strings in this case, and then we'll grab first name as well. Great, so we've got our name field all built up. Next thing I needed was business. Now, due to the nature of the Northwind employees table, they all work for Northwind, so there isn't a field. No problem, I can statically type something to populate that field on every form that I'm going to generate. So we'll do Northwind Food Suppliers Inc. in this case. Great. The next one that I wanted, and let's hop back here, we're going to skip the checkboxes for just a moment and go down here. So we want address as one field, and then separately city, state, and zip code. So what I'm going to do here is grab employee address, drag it over, and again, we'll just do a simple concatenation here. So we want city and region and postal code. Great. So again, we've got our nicely formatted concatenation formula here. We'll okay that. Now the last part is the checkboxes. The way that we're going to do the checkboxes within Exago is with a simple if statement. So essentially, we'll populate that form field with an X if the conditions are met, else we'll leave it blank, essentially unchecked, right? So I'll go into my formula editor once again. I'm going to type if. It'll bring up that function for me. It's also going to give me the 3 arguments that I need to give this function with a little description of what they might be doing for me. What role do they take within the formula? Excuse me. So the first thing is the condition. So if this condition is true, we will do the second, the consequent, else the alternative. The condition that I want here is if reports to equals null, or in other words, in maybe a little bit more clear format, if my employees do not report to anyone. Let's populate with an X, else null. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now the other formula I'm going to give it is simply the reverse. If reports to does not equal null, if that employee does have a boss or a manager or someone that they report to, as defined in my database, then populate with an X. And we're simply going to assign this to each of the respective checkboxes so that, of course, both can't be true. So if one is true, we'll populate that checkbox, else the other one will be populated. So in this case, else is still going to be null. I'll pause for just a moment for any questions. Of course, continue to type them in as we go. It looks like we're pretty good at this point. I just want to make sure that this logic makes sense to everyone. All right, so it looks like we're all set. I'm getting some thumbs up, but if, again, continue to type. If you're in the middle of a question or something pops into your head, keep going, please. We love to make this as interactive as possible. So this is where it gets really neat. This is where we're actually going to bring the template functionality into the picture within Exago, right? So I've got these 4 fields on the document. Rather, I've got these six fields on my report. and we're pretty good to go here. So I'm going to save just so that we know that this is all set here, right? I like to save periodically as I go, especially when I design it right in the designer here. Really quickly, I want to run this report and show you without a template what we've actually created. Now, this doesn't do too much for me, right? It's giving me the name of the employee and of course their employer as well as their address, and it just gives me this random X. So two things I'd like to point out here. The first is that the only employee that does not report to someone is Andrew Fuller. So when we generate this document, this template, I'm going to make a point to find Fuller because I want to just kind of show you how we can either populate one or the other with that X. The next thing I wanted to point out is that you don't ever I'm so sorry. You don't ever want your users to accidentally run this report to HTML and get this output. You know, they're expecting a W9 form in this case, and maybe you don't expose this form to your users, but you know what I mean. So what we can do actually within the report design is eliminate that possibility. Let's go into this menu. We're going to go ahead to Options and General. And I'm going to set Allow Execution in Viewer to False. This eliminates this button right here. Now, we're setting up a PDF right now. I also don't want them to be able to export to any other format. I only want them exporting to PDF. This is going to limit my user error, my options for user error in this case. The next thing I'm going to do is go into my template menu, and I'm going to link the fields. I'm going to merge the data. So I'll select my W9 template for the lab. We've got address, the rest of the address, the company, employee name, as well as individual and C Corp. So all the form fields that we would expect to see here we have. I'm going to start filling these in, right? So this is where, and I know that I mentioned at the beginning, the naming conventions of your form fields is important. This is where that is really handy. This might say form field 1 or untitled 1, whatever the form it would take from PDF Escape. And that really gives me no information. This makes it much more intuitive. I can start to fill this in. Now I know I want the checkbox to populate for C Corp if they report to someone, if the employee in question does report to someone. So if reports to is not null, then they in effect report to someone. So I'm going to select that there. This is going to be city, region, and postal code. Company is statically defined. Employee name and individual is going to be the other of the two of these if statements. So if they don't report to anyone, then they're an individual. Press OK here. Great. So again, I'm going to pause for any questions there. I think that part is fairly straightforward, but it is important to mention that it was straightforward because we named the fields accordingly. So I'm just going to take a moment, make sure that everybody feels comfortable with that. Okay, looks good. So the last step here is simply to export to PDF. And if I go ahead and do that, we're going to see the correct information filled in here, exactly as we saw in the finished copy at the top of the lab. So, oops, we've got Stephen Buchanan as our first employee here. He does report to someone, so we've checked C Corp in this case. And if we scroll down to Fuller, I think he's about halfway down here. Let me just move this out of the way so I can reach my scroll bar. And we'll look for Fuller. Should be next. Great. And we can see the individual is checked in this case. So our logic is working as we expected there. Awesome. It looks like everybody's following along pretty well. These are really not difficult to set up and use. And the nice part about them is that they are going to be a one-time setup, right? And then even if your data is changing, you're able to just regenerate these forms. Okay, so now that we've seen one format of templates, let's walk through an RTF version as well and see how it may differ. So I'm going to close out some of these. This time we're going to be looking at an invoice form. So I'm going to open up the completed copy here. That's going to be this one. And we're going to see what we're actually looking at here. So this is the finished copy again. The difference here, and one of the reasons that we're illustrating RTF as one of the types here is that you can do dynamically generated data. So you can see here that I have a different number of rows for populating this table for each of these. So in this case, I've got 9 rows here, and in this case, I only have 3. So we're going to show you how to set this up as well. Now, the method that I'm going to be showing you here today works when you have a limited number of rows generated for a given field. In this example here, I know that there won't be more than 9 rows of detailed data for each form. In the case, right, okay. So anyways, let's jump right in, right? I'm going to open up this document in Word and explain how we create the equivalent of form fields for a PDF in Word, which will now be called bookmarks. So I'm going to open up an incomplete version. This is the document that we just looked at, but not run through Exago yet. So it has no data populating it. It simply says description 0, description 1, etc. Now, a little bit of a difference here. If I create a bookmark, I'm not going to be given a box or a placeholder to kind of indicate where I placed that bookmark on my document. So it's important to put some placeholder text. You then highlight the text and click bookmark. Now this is going to allow me to name it. So I'm going to name this one date, and I'm going to add it. It will add it right here. So this placeholder text is really important because in the creation of my document, while I'm adding these bookmarks, I need to know exactly where I put my bookmarks in order to line everything up, in order to ensure I don't duplicate anything or do anything twice. So just a little usability note there I just like to point out. I'm going to do the same for customer. So let's create a bookmark. We'll name it customer. And I'll add that one in just a moment. Now, the other thing that's really neat is, or really cool, but also needs to be done in a specific way, is these repeating fields. So for something that may have more than one option here, in this case, I'm giving it up to 9. I have to use the same preceding string. So in this case, we're using AMT. It doesn't matter what that is. It just needs to be the same for each one. So I've got amount underscore 0, amount underscore 1. This format needs to be used in order to repeat detail information in a table, such as the one you see in front of you. It is 0 indexed. I need to start with 0. That's very important as well. And I think that's really the important things to note here. So I've got customer highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and put that field in. Let's add it. Now the other cool thing here is that if I open up my bookmarks menu and I'm not sure where a given field might be, but I have a bookmark for amount 5 and I forgot to put this amount 5 placeholder text here, I can use this go to and it'll highlight that there for me. So that can be helpful if you're going through the creation process and you forget one. Some little tips and tricks, bookmarks in Word here. And from here, the process is really the same, right? I'm going to save this. I'm going to upload it or save it to my reports folder, or if I'm an end user, upload it into my version of Exago. I'll go ahead into Exago here, and we'll take the same steps here. So I'm going to create a new advanced report. I'll name this one Northwind invoice form, just to be different from the invoice form that we already have here. I'll give it a few categories. So here we're going to need, excuse me, customers. We're going to need orders, order details, and products, right? So this should all look pretty familiar if you've ever used the Advanced Report Designer. In terms of sorts, we're going to need company name as well as product name. again, no filters, and I'm going to skip the layout tab once again and go right into the designer here. So I'll remove my page header. I'm going to actually add a group header and a group footer. In this case, we're going to be wanting to pull information per customer. So I'll add a group header on company name, as well as a group footer on company name. Great. Now the data that I want to add here is going to be again specific to the document that I'm trying to use. So in this case, I'm going to want company name here because I want to pull that once and then display some detail info per each company name. And let me just expand these a little so we have a little more readability here. All right, great. I'm also going to want to see some information pertaining to each order. So I want order ID, I want order date, I'm going to want product name. So I'll open up my products category. I'm going to want quantity. And then finally, I want the revenue. So I want revenue for the details section, and then also revenue in my footer so that I can see an overall for each customer. Okay, awesome. Great. So the next thing that we need to do is make those same changes to the export types. So in general, I'm going to disallow execution in viewer. I don't want my users exporting this to, or rather viewing this in HTML and confusing themselves. And again, I'll just limit this to RTF here. Press OK here. And the last step is simply to hook up the fields just like we did last time. So I'll go to my templates menu, going to select the correct one, Northwind's invoice template. We named them nicely so that we understand what we're looking for here. Now you can see that although I had amount _ 0 through amount _ 9, it's only displaying 1 because it understands that this is going to come from the same data field. So this is why it's so important to ensure that the preceding string, that AMT, is the same for each of your repeating fields. So in this case, I'm going to give it revenue from my detail, customers.company name, date, of course, is going to be order date, description is actually product name in our system, order number will be ID, quantity is quantity, and total will be revenue pulled from the footer. Great. So the last step is to export it to RTF, right? And we're going to end up with our completed invoice form as we saw here. All right, so I'm going to pause again for a moment and see if there are any questions. Okay, so I'm going to follow up with a couple after the lab to discuss a little bit more in-depth corner casey type things. But I think that is pretty much the conclusion of today's lab. I want to, of course, as always, thank you all so much for joining us. We definitely appreciate the attendance, and we're very excited that you guys seem to be taking some really good information from these. We've been getting pretty consistent feedback. Again, please be sure to, oh, hold on, it looks like a couple questions just came in. Let me see if they're, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and follow up with those offline. I think that there'll be a better use case there. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I'll be reaching out to a few of you, and I appreciate the time. We'll speak to you next time regarding information on stored procedures.